Yeah. All right. All right. Does that work for everybody? Much better? Yes, moonlighting. All right. So this is interesting. I've never done a setup where I'm facing everyone like this. Can everyone hear me in the back? All right. I will try my best to keep projecting. I'm used to having a microphone pushing back a bit more, but thank you everyone for attending this session. This is going to be .NET MAUI, one code base for one of all apps. And I chose the title because if you aren't familiar with .NET MAUI, it's meant to be a cross-platform app. MAUI is going to be an acronym, so it's multi-platform application. Technically we shorten everything to just app. So it's multi-platform app user interface. So that is .NET MAUI. My name is Charles Lakes. I am the Two Lakes Group. More so, I am Pro-Code developer, and I jump into this space as well for Pro-Code and Low-Code. But before I get too far down the weeds, just like we did across the way, we do want to thank our sponsors. This is my first time actually attending this conference, so I know it's 10 years strong. I know having a continuation of 10 years is not easy. Organizing a conference in general is not easy. So without the sponsors, this event would be near impossible to set up. So thank them. I think they were here yesterday, they're here today as well as tomorrow. So if you have a chance, go by the booths, hear a little bit about them, thank them for their contribution. And with that, we can start jumping into just a brief bit about me. Because again, this is my first time here, so no one here I don't think knows me. I think I'm a stranger to everyone so far. The general idea is that my background is Pro-Code, so software engineering. I got my start in the C languages, a little bit of VB.NET, ASP Classic. So I've been in the Pro-Code space for a while. I've done some desktop applications, some websites, intranets, but I quickly shifted to SharePoint. And is anyone here familiar with SharePoint? Okay, a few head nods. Say again?
Do we have to admit it?
Which is fair. It sounds like you've done SharePoint Server, and that's a problem of its own. But yeah, SharePoint Server, it is not something that a lot of people are proud of because for a long time it was very glitchy. SharePoint even today is still trying to, battle away some of the bad press from the years back because it was misconfigured. But that's largely where I got my start doing all Pro-Code development because you do a lot with SharePoint. SQL, you do stuff with the DB. But the funny part about being a developer, software engineer, SharePoint developer, which I'm sure a lot of you here also kind of face, is that we sometimes get so technical and the business doesn't really care to learn about the technical aspect. So I had to start learning how to be a community speaker to talk to the business leaders. And so that's where I start getting out of my shell. I still enjoy dark mode, but I started getting to understanding the business a bit more, and I started blogging. So that's just a little bit about me as a high level. And the divisive comment that I personally have fun with is introducing that I'm also a middle child and just getting an idea, are there any other middle children here? I think 3 might be my record so far. It's usually only like just one person, so I'm glad I got 3 here. So for us middle children, I always have a little treat that I like the divisive comment. I think us middle children are the better children. So we should be listened to. So thank you also additional middle kids for being here. So the agenda today is going to be essentially the 3 questions for .NET MAUI: the what, the why, and the how. Each one just very quick 3 topics. So we already know it's cross-platform. We're going to learn a bit more why cross-platform was necessary, a little bit of the origin, how we got here, as well as some of the extensibility of it. The why, I personally think the why is really important if you're going to try to convince leadership to go down this path. If you work for any large organization, they're usually hesitant against change. They've done the tried and true, they have the well-worn path, they're not trying to divert. But if you can convince them, if they're trying to do this application, these are some reasons why they want to listen. As well as other people from marketing, UA team, and other developers who may be against going to .NET. And then how is going to be the actual application. So XAML, we're going to introduce you to XAML, show you how you can still do some stuff with C# with code behind, as well as some of the benefits of hot reload for the UI. So, jumping into the first why, again, the first what. We've already talked about it being cross-platform. It is essentially going to be a platform where most of what you're doing for the application for mobile and desktop is going to be abstracted. So that's the high level of it. Because there's a bunch of different things out there. You have Cordova, you have people who are building things with jQuery mobile for some time, you have the React framework. There's a bunch of different ways you can build cross-platform apps. Microsoft specifically had WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation, some years ago. It wasn't really meant for mobile, but it was supposed to be a cross-platform for desktop. Windows, Mac, Linux, anything at that point. Whereas what you consider a pixel perfect. You have an engine to help you draw everything, and it's gonna have a similar UI across everything. So that kind of gives you the background. But MAUI became the new front runner because when you look at how we got there from WPF, there was a group of people who created an open source project called Mono. I think it's about 10, 15 years ago, they first started it. Then they started introducing Mono for iOS, Mono for Android. That gone into like one company, eventually became something called Xamarin. Microsoft actually bought Xamarin back in 2016, and Xamarin was the first platform that was like dedicated to cross-platform apps. If you had .NET experience, you could bring all that .NET experience with your understanding of XML, building cross-platform apps pretty seamlessly. Xamarin has unfortunately hit the lack of end of life last year, I believe May, because now MAUI is now stable for production. So anything you had built with Xamarin, if you had already heard about Xamarin or tinkered, can now be started to port over and update it to .NET MAUI. So we went from the WPF, which kind of introduced the concept of XAML, to Xamarin building cross-platform apps, Microsoft acquiring it, and now you have .NET MAUI, which is going to be the full suite of creating apps for Windows, iOS, macOS, as well as Android. However, that only takes care of the desktop apps and the mobile apps. There are going to be times that you may want to build something for web, and that's where you have the possible sensibility of working with .NET MAUI, Blazor hybrid apps as well. So now MAUI is more robust than some of the other cross-platform apps because you can build for the mobile, you can build for the desktop, and then if you extend it with Blazor, you can use a lot of your same code base to build for the web as well. So Blazor is essentially going to be your series of components, but you're able to leverage anything you know for web dev already. CSS, some JavaScript, you're going to have your HTML and so forth. So now you have the ability from a single code base of being able to build for multiple apps, desktops, and for the web. So that is the short of the what. When we talk about the why, again, this is if you're trying to convince leadership into jumping into it. I'm trying to convince leadership and marketing to get on board as well. The first thing leadership should care about is the same thing that a lot of us know. They care about money. So if you look at the average, just a simple search I did maybe a couple weeks ago, if you were to hire somebody that's 25 to 49 an hour, but a lot of businesses, especially with the advent of AI, they're not trying to do a lot of long-term hiring. So they may want to look just for a freelancer. So you may want a freelancer for just a short interim project for a few months. But if you're trying to bring something to market that's going to be for Android, iOS, Mac, and the web, that's going to be a dedicated developer per. So if we look at even the lower end of 61 an hour for a freelance developer, this could be something that talks to leadership. Because this is not a realistic timeline, but let's imagine we have something that could be knocked down in 3 months. Month 1 is going to be all development. You're getting the bulk of the content done. Then month 2 is going to be you are just supporting. So month 1, you're full-time, 160 hours. Month 2, you drop down to half-time because you just need to support it. UA found a bug, you're making little edits here and there. And then month 3 is going to be documentation. So 280 hours roughly. So when you start talking dollars like this, you're able to show leadership why this is going to be important for them. So even for a single developer for the web, Android, iOS, each of those would now be about 50,000. Not bad for a large company, but I've talked to some companies who have very small margins where they have to pretty much count the pennies. So 51,000 is not realistic in their budget for the time frame if you have to be that tight. If you had a single developer that's able to kind of leverage those, you can have a specialty in addition to the expertise of .NET coming in to kind of undercut that cost as well. So for leadership, that's kind of how you get on board because, again, they care about the money. One of the things that might be beneficial to marketing is that, I know especially our marketing team, we have a running joke that certain fonts, certain colors have to be part of the brand. And when you build an application, if it's not part of the brand, they don't want the application to go out. But if you abstract everything, you'll see here at the top, all you have to know inside .NET MAUI is you want a button. It abstracts all that for you. So once it loads on the platform, it's going to realize this is an Apple device. Okay, how is the Apple device rendered for a button? It tells it for the operating system. It renders the same thing for Android and Windows. The nuance will be for Apple, and it'll specify if it's an iOS device like an iPhone or if it's a Mac device. So marketing can simply, I know I joke around with this with some other people. They say marketing never learned it. But I personally believe XAML being XML based, anybody can pick it up. And if you want, you see there's a lot of properties here where you're not really coding, you're just adding in an XML tag for a button, for a date picker, for an editor, and you have a series of properties. And I think this is simple enough that anybody can pick up because as a developer, ideally we want to start getting to the edge cases. We want to start getting to something that's really going to test and push our skills, not deal with the nuances of the UI. We can, but I think one of the things that's funny about MAUI is that you can probably offset this to either a junior developer or even the marketing people or UA people. If you get a ticket for support that, oh, you used the wrong color, they can technically change the color and commit it back and not risk breaking anything. So you have a lot of different objects here that are abstracted for all the platforms that MAUI is able to build for you. And the piece that's going to be convincing if you have developers where they may want to stick with Python. I have nothing against Python. Python is actually a pretty slick language. However, if you're trying to catch the existing skill sets from people, I think there's a higher percentage of people who are more familiar with the C languages. And so having that familiarity with the C languages, you can tie this into MAUI as well as Blazor and build these applications. And everything that you're running is running on .NET, which for a lot of companies, that's a selling point because it's not a new technology that they're worried about long-term support. Microsoft has been supporting .NET for years now, and they're going to keep supporting .NET, keep coming out with improvements versus a new process. And I've heard from some business leaders where they enjoy the shiny objects, but they're very scared about investing in something that they're not sure how it's going to be structured in the next 2-3 years if it's newish to the industry. But with developers, you know .NET, you know how to create an object, you know how to cast the object, add some parameters, and you know how to do your event handlers. So it's very familiar still. So wrapping that up to the how before we start jumping into a demo, this is going to be a snippet of XAML. XAML looks a little scary at the front, but you'll notice the first tag is XML based. So all XAML is the extensible application markup language. So it's just a markup language dedicated for these type of applications, which, as I mentioned, originated inside of WPF back in the day. But you have a page and you have a bunch of visual elements. At the base, everything is a visual element. Your layout, your button, your label, your date picker, they're just elements in the page. As long as you're adding into some type of layout, you have a page, you have a layout, and then you have a series of elements. And that's the basic structure of .NET MAUI. And a lot of the same things you would do with, if you don't want to create the pages, create the layout with XAML, you can do a lot of the same stuff with MAUI. But the beauty here is that you have two different pieces. So that if you want to do MVVM or any other platform of separating your code from your UI, you can do all your visual elements inside of the XAML page, and then all your logic inside the code behind the C#, which gives you a cleaner interface, which as a pro code developer, you probably appreciate because it limits what can break when small changes are made. And there's actually a bunch of elements inside of XAML. If you're making a change, if you make that the wrong change, it's not going to break your code or crash the application. So there is some safety, some guardrails in place as well. And has anyone worked with anything that had a hot reload before? Is this all right? So some more hands up. So you already know the benefits where If you're doing major changes to the logic, it's not going to carry those over. But simple UI changes, the hot reload is very beautiful. It's very fast, pretty performant, and they've gotten better. There was actually a recent update, I believe earlier this year, where the hot reload got some more improvements. Again, I come from the SharePoint background. Again, we agree it's not the prettiest background, but one of the things that I remember building apps for SharePoint early, SharePoint Server 2007, is if I made the simplest change for a widget for an app, I had to push it to the app server, I had to reset the ISS, I had to wait for that to come back up, spin up the pool. It was a whole thing for just minor changes. The hot reload is almost night and day from me having to spend hours just restarting everything to something running in like a few seconds. So it also speeds up the time to market if you're worried about the time constraints of a project. All right, so because we're at a tech dev conference, I'm actually going to do a demo. The pieces I'm going to highlight is if you don't already have MAUI installed, how to kind of get there for the installer, understanding some of the resources that are available for you, the pages, the layouts. We've already spoken kind of high level that everything on the page is considered a visual element at its base. Everything else is just inheriting from the parent abstraction of the visual element. The resource dictionary is going to be how you assign your styles, your colors. You can do those per page, or you can do those across the whole application. There is a little nuance in the ability of if you're working with some navigation. You have data models and just how you work with emulators. The quick part about and did that get too dark? All right, I don't think it got too dark. So the installer is simple. If you have worked with Visual Studio, it's very similar to just run the installer, but you'll notice there's a section here that says desktop and mobile. So that's where you'll find .NET MAUI if you go to the installer for Visual Studio. This is 2022. You'll download that, you install it. Just like any other extension, you're then going to have to be able to create a project, and there's going to be a number of projects that become available. The one we're going to be working on is going to be the first one, .NET MAUI app. But again, you can always, if you are expecting to build something with the web app, you can already start the application for Blazor. You don't have to create a new project. You can always add Blazor later, but you can start with Blazor now if you would like to. You can create your own class library, as well as if you want to restructure the project. Because I'll show you in a moment how the resources are structured today. But if you want to create a .NET MAUI app where everything is its own application, again, something specific with Windows, Android, and so forth, that is also possible. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in how things are going to be structured. And with that, let's jump into the demo. This one, sample. All right, with me being in dark mode, can everybody in the back see it just fine?
Completely unreadable. That's because it's small. I'm old.
All right, let me see if I can zoom in.
On the bottom right of the actual pane, you just increase the percentage. On the left? Bottom left, I mean. But right there. Just increase the percentage. That's good enough. I think it's good.
All right. So this, I am going to, let me make sure I actually have the other page up and running. So when you get and you spin up a .NET MAUI application, it scaffolds quite a bit for you, which is actually pretty powerful because you will want to kind of see how MAUI looks in the beginning. Let me actually throw this into the comment. Yeah, I'm going to build this. So when you're building, for simplicity, you can always just build on Windows if you're using Windows, but you do have the option here to hit the drop down. This part still might be a little small because it's a command bar, but you have the option of creating emulators for Android. So if you have a specific device you're targeting or multiple devices, you can create dedicated emulators for a Pixel 8 or Pixel 9, whatever it may be, and have your application debugging against that. But for ease, for building, I'm just gonna build this against Windows and just kind of show you how, even when you create a brand new app, you say, I want a new MAUI application, this is what they kind of give you out the background. All right, it's building. All right, so some of the very basic elements that kind of show you how you're going to work with MAUI is they give you a default image, which is going to be the logo here. They show you how to work with some labels, as well as a very simple click action of counting how many times something's been clicked. So this is all out of the box to kind of show you how some features are going to be working. If I wanted to, again, because this is going to be hot reload available, I can actually go to the demo page here. So it's called .NET Bot. If I decide I want to change this to be a little bit more excited because it's the hello world, as well as add in, see, some text color, I'll add it down below here. So text color, this is going to be this. And that's not dramatic enough, but if you can, you see that's changed a bit. And this is showing you how the hot reload works automatically, making some of these changes. So we're able to do a lot of adding here without having to reload the app itself.
Did you have to save it for the changes to take effect?
Did I have to save changes?
Yeah, did you have to save the file for the changes to take effect?
Nope, it's hard to see, but I still have the asterisk here where it shows that it's still unsaved. So as you're making the changes are still unsaved to your file. Once you stop building, well, even as it's built, you can choose to save it, but it's not a requirement for some of these visual elements to show up for MAUI. So even just now, this is still unsaved, but I just changed the text to red, and you see it's hello world red. So these are all working in real time without doing anything. And all I've specified is there's a label. We have a button here. If we want to make the text larger as well, font size, do something unreasonable like 96. And it's available here, but you also notice that it builds the pane here on the right-hand side as well. So if you're looking for very simple, nuanced changes, the right-hand side is going to work perfect for you. But sometimes you may want to also just, if you have multiple screens, because you can also just set this up on a different screen. But let me actually stop this build. And something I wanted to share here. So sometimes, again, if you're making small changes to the UI, you don't have to rebuild. If you're making more logical changes, there's times where it may prompt you with not an error message, but tells you that, hey, there's going to be a problem. We would prefer that you rebuild this, just to make the changes. So I'm now going to do those, and I'm going to actually show another page. So the one I'm actually going to use for the demo showing how this can be built from scratch is I created a very simple page that's going to not necessarily represent this event, but be a very similar counter event if I wanted to. So I have a page here, I unhid these buttons. This is going to be a simple page I created for an event like this. If you're scheduling an event, you have the subject. What is the event? What is the location? We're in Chattanooga. Is it virtual, yay or nay? But you'll see that these are, so there's a couple things wrong here. One, they kind of too scrunched up to one another. Secondly, all of these should not be line of text. So for instance, virtual, there should be the radio button, checkbox, the same thing for if it's all day event. So all of these should not be single line of text. And there's actually going to be some scrunching of the buttons at the very bottom as well. When we're on a large screen, we don't always extend it. But if people are on small screens, this is going to be unreadable for them. So what I'm going to show is, it's going to be kind of weird. Let's see if this works. Put that to the right, this over here. And I'm going to show how we can start tweaking this a bit to make it more user-friendly. So that's going to be page here. So for this, I've created a new page, which we can all agree, well, I'll show it just in case. If you're creating a new page for an app, you would actually just go to the tree view. You can right click like you do any solution, say add new. But when you go to add new, you're gonna look for the section for .NET MAUI. You can actually create two types of pages. You can create a XAML page, or you can create a pure C# page. So let me actually show that. Here's a solution. I'm going to come here and say add new item. And so .NET MAUI is going to be here. If I create a XAML page, I get the XAML as an option, and I have the C# as code behind. If you choose to create a content page purely C# because you feel better creating the page from code, you can also do that as an option. So you have two ways of creating pages: all code or code with XAML. But for this page, we simply have a bunch of text boxes. So subject, layout, so forth, and you see that's all that's here on the left-hand side. What's going to be the first part to realize is when you have a page, you can have a layout. There's three types of layouts. You have a generic stack layout, or you can specify what we call the optimized views of vertical or horizontal. I chose a vertical because we're going to go up and down. But the problem with the vertical layout is if you have too many elements, it doesn't scroll. So you have to specify another container because you can actually nest these into one another, and that's how you allow your screen to scroll. So within the stack layout, around it, I'm going to say I want a scroll view. And then I'm going to take the entire stack layout here and drop this inside of my scroll view. I think there's also a shell. You can also specify inside the actual page itself if the scroll bar should be visible. So I've specified that this is going to be a scroll view. I specified that the nav bar should be visible. So now if they're on a small device, they're able to scroll and see everything perfectly fine. But still, if you want to pretty this up a little bit, one thing that I've noticed that a lot of screens, we don't see a lot of label on top of text. They're usually side by side. So what you can actually do is use the horizontal layout inside of a stack layout. So a stack layout could be your building block of putting everything on top of one another in the page, but the horizontal layout is what you're going to do to group them. So we can actually just say that here, this is going to be a horizontal stack layout. I'm going to put the first two elements in here, just like so. And you see that I've already put them side by side. But that's not going to be the most pretty, so we're going to actually make it a little bit wider so they can stack. I would like the label to also be wide. Let's say that's going to be 200. And the entry should also have a width of, let's say just a little bit lower, 190. So that centralizes them. So that we can actually do that to all these to make them stack a little bit better. But one thing you may notice, especially if you come from a web dev experience or anything dealing with styling, that I'm now adding these styles to each and every element. And that becomes extremely redundant and inefficient if I need to make changes. There's actually a way inside of .NET MAUI where if I maximize this again, I'm going to make the solution panel visible, go to the Solution Explorer. So there's a bunch of things here, but the thing I want to highlight is, and I realize this is probably small text still, but in the right-hand pane, when you're looking at your Solution Explorer, there's a folder called Resources. This means for all your apps, Windows, iOS, and Android, you're able to have content that's centralized and shared across all. And a couple of those things are going to be your images, just like we saw the .NET bot, but you also have a colors and a styles out of the box. You can create your own color XAML page and your styles, but they give you some out the box. If I open colors, this is some of the default that they give you. So you have more just XML styling of your colors. This is your resource dictionary that we talked about for the idea. So we have a resource dictionary of colors that are available across your whole application. So you don't have to assign a color for every element that's unique for each page. You can come to the top level of the shared resources, specify your colors. Everything has a key, which has to be unique because this will be their unique identifier. And this is how you assign colors to applications. To elements of your applications, let's say. And then as you're using these colors, you'll see that you can actually use the colors inside of other colors as well. So there's a bunch of base colors up here. We have the whites, the magentas, the different grayscale, and then we want to use these for our brushes. If you use another element, it's something called a static resource. So you specify, I want to use an existing resource that's been defined at runtime, and that's going to be your static resource. And that's actually just one type. These are great if you're going to be working with something that's not going to change. If you decide you want to build an application that's going to toggle from light mode to dark mode, you will then create a dynamic resource. And that's something that on load time, you can actually toggle between the two. But for a lot of things you're building, a static resource is perfectly fine. So this is how we work with the colors. So we have essentially a bunch of XML style elements with our colors specified. With those colors, we can now specify how we're going to style our elements. So let me actually scroll to the top here. And you see that, again, MAUI gives us a lot out the box to give us a guide of how to work with things. Every style is going to be XML based and it targets a visual element. Are we working on a box view? Are we targeting a button? Whatever it may be, you specify your setters. This is style is targeting this element. And if you specify simply target type button, that means it applies to all the buttons inside your style, which is, again, very reminiscent of CSS. You can target all your inputs, all your labels, and so forth. You can do the same thing here. But if you want to target a very specific one, you can always give it a key as well. So we can say xname, and we can say this is going to be the buttons by the name of demo for SCS. Now when I go to those buttons, I can just specify use the style element title demo SCS. So you can target all the elements, or you can specify them using that type of targeting with the name. But something that you may have noticed if you're looking ahead is that there is theme binding, as I mentioned, with dark versus light. So we can specify if this is going to be a dark theme or a light theme based off something, and use some binding, because you do have two-way binding inside of .NET MAUI as well. Binding applies to your data as well as to your styles. And for the binding, it's simply going to be if something changes in one element, is it going to be reflected in the other? So you do have that available. And something else that's pretty powerful here is, feels very similar to, again, CSS. I actually worked on a couple down here where I started creating what I call a base. You can actually create something and have other elements based off of it. Maybe I didn't do it for this one. I'll jump to my personal project. I have a personal project I'm working on. And let me adjust the here. If I jump to my styles in this personal project, you can actually specify the target of an element, give it a key, and then you can have other styles use it as a base. So everything here is going to be labeled, but I want to base it on another style I did earlier in my solution. That way you don't have to keep using the same setters for every same element. If you have a label for your title, a label for your header, title for your subheader, you can actually specify, I know all of these are going to have a text of a dark gray. I know they're all going to use this font family. That's fine. I can set all those core elements on these, and then anything that's going to be special for the title or the field, I specify if it's going to be bold, if it's going to be large, and that is going to be your piece that's different. So you can actually specify a series of colors, then you can come to your style and set all your styles, set your base styles, and then just choose what other elements these are going to be based off of to help set the standard for your rest of your application. Now I know that's, before I move on to the next part, does anyone just have any comments or any clarifying points on what's been covered so far? Good.
So when it comes to using C# in this, is it just another way to create a page?
So you can actually, so anybody who can hear was like, is C# just another way of creating a page? C# works with manipulating the page elements as well as creating the page. So an example of creating elements, or sorry, modifying elements in here, if I jump into this second page, let me actually back out here, go to page 2, and this might be a better example of how C# was. So this is actually where I was gonna start taking it. So page 1 is essentially all the elements stacked on top of one another, not prettified or anything. If I go back and come to page 2, this is the same page with me adding some elements. One thing that I'm able to do with C# is I could create the page, But what I did here is, let's say the time. I want to create a way of being able to specify the time. I can actually show you what I did with C#. So you can create the page, or you can actually work with elements in the page. So C# gives you that flexibility. So if I come to page 2, code behind, that's going to be under my views. So if you specify, I don't know why it's red right now, but if you specify the name of an element, so I have an element on the example page called time start. That's the start of the event. I have one for time end. And you see I use C# to specify basically all the times from 12 to 11. And so you could create the page, or you can do something like this where you're specifying the drop downs here. So if I decide I want to, it's like this. Hopefully it's not going to be breaking. See 15 and 45. And you see I'm also specifying the index. So hopefully this gives you a visual of it. You can build elements with the C#. You can also manipulate elements, and you can also add click events, which would be, like that's what I'm doing here to move between these pages, is I've added event handlers to the navigation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so is that C# explicitly linked to that XAML page, or are you selecting that specific element by some select?
So if you create the XAML page itself, because remember you have two ways of creating a page. You can create a pure C# page, or you can create a XAML page. If you create a XAML page, I realize it's harder to zoom on the side here, but for every XAML page, .xaml, you get a C# page, what we call code behind. That is going to be C# dedicated to that page. So if you have the same element on multiple pages, you're not going to conflict because this is dedicated to that one page. You can create higher level C# pages, just as you would a view or a view model or something, and you can have that work with everything as long as you're using the namespace.
Gotcha.
That sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else have questions about C# and how it kind of ties in? Actually not sure why the app isn't clicking for the button. I'll give it another build. But the other thing that's also beneficial with C#, whether or not you're working with the elements, you can actually choose to, if I go back to the main page here, you have the ability of specifying the click action on the button if you want to inside the XAML as well. So one of the properties of the elements should be the tap request, or the gestures, as they might call it. You can have taps, you can have presses, on press, on release, depending on the element, just like you would with JavaScript. So here's a button I specified. The name of the button is called counter button. As a text, you see the semantic properties, which allows, if you have people who are going to be using e-readers, these can actually read to see what's happening. And I specified there's going to be a clicked event, and the clicked event is called on counter click. And if that specifies it, so now inside the C#, I could simply just go to that page and choose to look at on counter click. I didn't have to add the event handler, so you can either do, so this gives you an example of how this could work. I could go inside the XAML and specify there's a clicked event, just like you saw just then. There's a clicked event with this handler, or I can simply specify that I have two buttons like I did with page 1 and page 2 and add the event handler explicitly. So you have that flexibility as well. Either add it explicitly or let Xamarin specify the event handler and you just build it out. And I realized I got started a bit late, so let me actually just show you how some of the styling works for the second page, since that is more of a polished project. So hide this again, and I'm just going to show how this is being put together. So, something else you get to do when you're working with XAML is you have MAUI, you have a shell. The shell is going to be your default container for it. So when the app is started, it is loading on your platform, is looking to see what type of platform you are working on. You do have very specific code you can do to say only do this on Android, only do this on iOS. And a good reason to do that is, iOS devices have that header at the top, and you may want to give it some extra padding. So you have dedicated ways of specifying, do this on iOS, do this on Android as well. So that gives you some flexibility. You also have the ability of hiding the nav bar, but this is where we talked about being able to create a scroll view, have the static resources, because the last thing developers we want to do is keep repeating ourselves. So the style and the color resource dictionary that I showed earlier, these are examples of how those are used. So I created a static resource called field title and field entry. And so for every label, for the subject, for the location, I assign the title because that's what I'm going to do. Those have a styling as well as a width. Same thing with the entries. I specify the type, the text color, the font family. We can have everything done in here. And this goes to your question about what can C# do? If you want to, it's always possible you can just hard code all the date values or any drop downs if you're doing the picker. That is possible. So if you want to do everything UI related strictly through XAML, you can. But if you want to shortcut it, that's where C# really kind of shines, if you can shortcut a lot of this. So instead of me adding each of these times directly, I was simply able to just do 3 for loops and build the timeline for us. And I think same thing with buttons. You can specify what the buttons should be called. You give them a name. You give them their styles as well. The other thing that's going to be very powerful here is because now he's building on the shoulders of Xamarin, you have a community that's actually building a lot. There's a few people I follow on LinkedIn who were sharing some recent news. There's a company who just built a bunch of open source resources to build more visually appealing. This is not, I'm a programmer, I'm not a designer, so this isn't the prettiest thing we can have, but it shows how we went from a simple just black screen with just some styles to building something a little bit more dynamic that looks a little bit more professional. And even with the logo here, I took this from the website and I just added this here because once, again, you put something inside the resources folder, it makes it available to all your apps. So if you want to have dedicated images for different sizing, you just simply add those to the resources folder, or you can go directly into a folder for each application. So let me actually share again this. So you do have platforms dedicated to each one. So here on the side, the text is small, but you have Android, iOS, you have Mac. Tenzin is actually Samsung. So if you want to build some Samsung devices, that's going to be Tenzin as well. And you have Windows Desktop. And you have a dedicated platform folder for each of those. So you have the shared resources, which is going to be for all the platforms. But if you have platform-specific content, you can build all this inside the Scenic code base. And realize coming up with time, let me jump back into this. So the high level is once you come into Visual Studio, especially 2022, it's going to be the most stable release. The installer is going to get you up and running with .NET MAUI. It's a pretty sizable download. Shouldn't take too long, but you just have the installer, you have the shared resources, because I realize it's hard to cover all of this in an hour. There's so much here. There's actually someone from Microsoft, and if you look on YouTube for James Montemagno, he actually has like a much longer course, like 4 hours, I believe, for just introduction content. And he talks about MAUI pretty often. So there's a lot of content out there for MAUI for that, to show you how to use the shared resources. Every page has a single element. The element just happens to be your layout, which could be the stack layout, your vertical layout. If you want a generic one, you can just use the regular stack layout. You have your elements, the resource dictionary for your styles and your colors. You can actually move through pages. Sorry, I forgot to show just a very simple navigation. Let me actually show that. Stop the build. So a very simple way you move through pages is it's not going to be real time, so you're going to build it to be async. So if you actually come to the code behind here, so I have 2 buttons here. One button to go to page 1, another to go to page 2. In the code behind, it's essentially going to be an async, and you're going to wait for it, and you're going to push something to the next page. And this is how you can move from page to page. At the same time, if you're working with data, you can actually use this to push data through pages as well. MAUI actually uses routers, so you can actually put things inside of a URI route to pass data as well. So there's a few different ways you can consume content from REST APIs and push from page to page. All right, but then it actually gets us actually into the recap. So the what of MAUI is going to be that is cross-platform. It's meant to speed up development. Personally, I have an app I'm working on, but the idea of trying to build something dedicated for iOS and learn Objective-C, then jump into Android is a little bit much for me. So cross-platform is good for speeding up that process. It's built on the shoulders of Xamarin, so you have a community from Xamarin as well as WPF to help you. It's good for leadership because if the leadership is worried about the money allocation, this is going to ideally centralize the code base, because another concern about having a dedicated app for Android, dedicated for Windows, and dedicated for iOS is you will have sprawl, because people are going to start building things differently. You're not going to have a dedicated resource to support all of it. So it centralizes your development effort, and it centralizes it because you can separate the UI into pure XAML if you choose to do so. You can also design the UI using the C#, and the hot reload is going to kind of help you work with the 2 of them, keeping the logic separate. And with that, I know that was a lot of content to try to cram into 50 minutes, but thank you all for attending.